I think a lot of people probably have heard of peer groups. Hopefully, you know the value of doing it or the value of not doing it, depending on where you're at. Let's talk about how to do it.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we look at what is changing in the industry and take it to the front lines to those that are driving those changes. As always, I'm Donnie, Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me, should I say on location? I don't know how to describe your location, but Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say hello? Talk a little bit about where you're at. Yeah. Which most people really care about, right? And then,
absolutely.
And then we can jump into our topic.
Yeah. Hey, good morning. It's Dan Gordon, PCO Bookkeepers, outsourced CFO work, accounting work for pest and lawn people, as well as an exit planning firm. But I am on location at the WorkWave Beyond Service Conference. What a party! I mean, what an educational conference. They don't disappoint. It was really, really terrific. Here's the last day, but lots and lots of educational information. And then each night, the entertainment was terrific, culminating last night with the signature for anybody who went to Pest World for the last 2 years, the signature WorkWave rave, complete with cheesy blinking ice cubes in your drink and,
wow.
Smoke and mirrors and everything else. And it was a lot of fun. So WorkWave, kudos to those guys. They really know how to throw a conference. So really enjoyed that.
Hey, but hang on. I've never had like lighted ice cubes in my, I guess I don't really drink. So maybe that's not lighted ice cubes in a Coke doesn't sound too exciting.
Yeah, it's probably the most unsanitary thing you could ever think of. It's these plastic things with these little light bulbs and a little switch that you turn the switch and you can make them blink and you put them in your drink and it's
not enough to get hammered. You got to be in style while you get hammered.
Yeah, you can't get hammered without the.
Right.
It's
you got to accessorize.
And by the way, there were plenty of people who were hammered, so it was good. Not me though. But I'll tell you what, we brought a crew. We brought a bunch of our young guys, and they just had a blast. Talking to friends and clients, and learned a lot, and it was really terrific. So, like I said, kudos to WorkWave for a great job putting it together.
Good. Well, let's get into our topic, Dan. You want to introduce our topic?
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because, we've been talking about this topic for a while, and I brought it up at a couple of the sessions that I did at WorkWave. If anybody was interested and got plenty of interest. So we've been, I've been involved personally with peer groups for probably about 10 years now, running them and whatnot. And, one of the neat things with peer groups is they're very educational. They keep me close to the industry. Obviously we do accounting work, but it keeps me close to folks operationally and everything. And I really enjoy it. And you and I were talking about expanding and doing more peer groups. And so I think that, I brought it up at a couple of my sessions and we had quite a bit of interest. So today we're going to talk about peer groups. What exactly is a peer group? And so I will let you introduce your take on it. And then we can, as my son says, we can chop it up.
Like most things, I have quite a few opinions on this topic. And, we named it peer groups, next level opportunity or a waste of time. And, I came up with that title because it absolutely could be either one, really depending upon, what you want, what you make out of it. I mean, it's like anything, right? It's like what you put into it is what you get out of it. But I was thinking about this topic, and it's funny that you mentioned, I did not know you were going to mention this in your sessions, but we were talking about it. And so I've been thinking about it over the last week. And, one of the things I was thinking about is how I got started, how I learned in the industry. And I think the first time I met you, Dan, was actually at a peer group meeting. I think it's maybe before, I don't remember, but anyway, I don't remember our first time together, Dan. I know that probably hurts your feelings.
I'm very, very disappointed, and I bet you don't even remember my birthday.
Yeah.
Anniversary.
Exactly. 100%. So if you think about it, right? I was thinking about, like, what is one of the biggest determinants of success? I remember when I first got in the industry, I felt very lost. I had a background in leadership. I came through, Air Force. I was an officer. I felt like I had tons and tons of leadership experience, yet I was getting my butt kicked. And this is old counsel. It's old wisdom, but it's very applicable. And that is, one of the biggest determinants of success. It's pretty simple, right? You find someone who's doing what you want to do. You get to know that person, and then you do what they do, meaning that you learn from them. And I know in my own experience and I've talked about this in previous episodes, but Mr. Dave Boos, and Dan, you helped Dave sell his company.
Yeah, great guy. Yeah,
super good guy. But I saw him speak at a conference, and man, immediately after he spoke, I went up, gave him my card. He lived in Richmond, which is far enough away from my market. I was in the Raleigh market at the time only. And it really, it evolved into kind of this mentor model where I had a lot of one-on-one meetings with him. I would go up quarterly. We would go through my numbers. We would go through what I was doing. And it was it was a beneficial relationship because, here I am pushing in my mind, this is me giving my side of the story. And I'm always the hero and always the winner. And I don't do anything wrong. No,
this is true.
So I would go up and I would be showing him, things in technology. I would be talking to him about internet marketing. And so the goal I had was to give him something, but, I got a ton out of it because, I can't share Dave's numbers and I can't share what Dave did, but let me just tell you, the man knew how to run a business. He wasn't the biggest company, but probably one of the most profitable companies I've ever seen. And he ran a really sharp and tight business. And so I had the benefit of learning from him, this is how you do it. And that really is kind of a mentor model, which is very different than from a peer group model. When we talk about peer groups it's kind of a different dynamic because, in a mentor model, it's one-on-one. You're very much into the details. Oftentimes, you got to be able to give something really valuable to the person that's mentoring. I know now we will do this and I don't ask for anything in return because it's kind of my way of giving back, right? I know for a fact that I'm not where I'm at today because of my own smarts. It's because I found other people who are way smarter than me. I replicated what they did and I learned from them, basically did what they did. And lo and behold, it works.
That's the beauty of the industry, right?
It is.
We have a very simple business model. It's not easy to execute, but it's very simple. And if you can get with the right person to just show you how that works, that's pretty interesting stuff. But let's talk about peer groups and how they work. But mentor, and by the way, I highly recommend a mentorship model as well. The cool thing about peer groups is, you grow up together, and let's talk about your observations on that.
So the first model is mentor model, and I'm going to talk about when that may be appropriate as you develop as an entrepreneur, as you develop as a business owner, even as you develop as a manager. The peer group model is a little bit different, where the mentor is one-on-one. I almost view a peer group as a board of directors. Meaning that and this is going to sound so obvious, but I have to say it. It is a group of your peers, and there's a broader group, right, where they have more ideas, they have more experience. The good thing about mentor model is that you can get very dialed in on the details. The downside of a mentor model is that you get one perspective. With a peer group, it's a lot different. I'm going to tell you right now, Dan and I are members of several peer groups. And there are some who are rock solid. They hold each other accountable. They're doing really, really well. There are others that, straight up dumpster fire.
I don't want to even go there.
Yeah.
But
what I'm saying is true.
Yes, you're absolutely right. If you just go because it's a social event, that's not the right thing to do. And you're turning red. Very red.
Because I had to say it. But anyway, so yes. So, you almost like, where the mentor model is kind of a one-on-one, the peer group for me is very, very important because, when you think about it, when you're running a business, when you're a top leader, you can't go somewhere in the company and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, hey, I'm thinking about this, or challenge me on this. And so, having this board of directors, oftentimes, as much as we like to think that we're, princess unicorns, we typically problems that we're having, I can almost guarantee someone else has had that problem. And there's probably someone in that group who's overcome that problem. And so, what I will tell you is that, having a board of directors is very, very valuable because you have a broad group, you have more ideas, and you have more experience. Now, just remember that not all ideas are great and not all ideas are going to directly apply to your business, right? And we'll get into that a little bit later. But so that's kind of my experience. I want to get into what that means. Like, what is a peer group? We've already talked about, the board of directors idea, but really what it is it's a group of guys or gals, right? A group of industry leaders. Most of the time it's business owners. They meet together consistently. I have been in peer groups where we met quarterly. I've been in peer groups where we met annually. I would say it really depends on your group. If you're a group of really young entrepreneurs, you're just getting started. When I say young, I'm talking about life cycle of your business. I'm not talking about age. Quarterly is probably good because you're like in the first year of a baby, right? Every single week, the baby's doing something new. Like no week is the same. And I would say it's the same way in your business, right? When you're first probably 4 to 5 years, I don't know that any week's the same. You're growing so fast and things are changing so quickly. A quarterly meeting is actually probably a pretty good cadence. If you're in a much more mature business, I don't know why I'm talking about babies and adolescents and adults here. I guess we could get into elderly as well. I don't know, but that cadence, that cadence is going to be a little bit longer because things do change, but they're not going to change a ton. The rate of change is not going to be as much. Right now, my favorite peer group, we meet twice a year. And that's a pretty good cadence. We do kind of a year in and then we do a mid-year check-in. And so nonetheless, I mean, it's, that's what it is. It's your board of directors where you guys are meeting. And just remember when I say guys, I'm just talking about the group. You're meeting consistently and you have a set agenda and you're holding each other accountable. Now, let me tell you what a peer group's not. And I have to be cautious when I say this, but I just have to say it. Number one is that sometimes people join peer groups and they know it all. And their peer group is the place where they can dispense how smart they are and how well they're doing. And they don't show any vulnerability and they don't get real. If that's and look, you have to be honest, right, with yourself. And you got to be willing to show people your dirt because otherwise a peer group's not going to benefit you at all. The second thing that a peer group is not is a place of empty commitments. One of the things I have observed a lot, especially from business owners now, is that you can get away with saying you're going to do something and then not do it and there are no consequences, right? Who's going to go to the owner and say, well, you did this. You said you're going to do this, but you didn't do it, right? Maybe they'll do it when they're quitting.
Right.
But they're not going to do it, mid-cycle. And so, a peer group's not a place where you're going to come in and show everyone how smart you are and play the game of, I'll make commitments, but I won't follow through. Mm-hmm. And then under this all sounds horrible, but I just have to say it. The number 3 thing that a peer group is not, and sometimes I think people confuse this, is that it's a vacation club. Like, the point of the peer group is like, hey, how can I use the company dime? And I think there are peer groups out there that do this. Now, this is Donnie's perspective. To me, a vacation club, I take vacations with my family. I take vacations with my friends. It's great if you can be my friend. It's great if we can be friends in the peer group, but I'm there for a business reason. Right. That's
it's so funny. We have a lot of peer groups that we do in these destinations and they're, oh yeah, let's do it, at this great place. And we go there and you know what happens? I fly in, we do the peer group and I fly out. And sometimes I look out at the window and, if we're in a beautiful beach or a mountainous place, I get to see it from the, but it's up to the group. It's up to the personality of the group. The one thing that I would say is that, yes, that from a board of director, corporate governance perspective, peer groups are terrific. They're also really good for, hey, I'm buying a new whatever, copy machine, where can I get that? What have you guys found? So
Right.
you can bounce off purchasing ideas, you can bounce off marketing ideas. I tried this, different systems. So it's a corporate governance, but also an operational. Hey, what do you guys do? What could we do better? And the right peer groups are really a lot of fun and very educational. But I think that as you said, one of the things that you do when you're the boss, when you're the owner, you have nobody to hold you accountable. When you show up at these peer groups, at the end, you make these commitments. Okay, for the next group, or for the next meeting, I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing. And you show up and you haven't done it. It's just like, people just start throwing things at you.
Trust me, man. I'm surprised, Dan, you're not talking, because I may not have been known to make someone else get very emotional when they show up and have not followed through on their commitments multiple times. So having said all that, that's really what a peer group is, and what it's not. Let's talk about why you might want to do it. And Dan just hit on this. And I would say the number one reason that I enjoy peer groups is the accountability. For me, now this is just my personality. When I know I'm on the hook and I've got to come back and report what I did, I pay attention. And that could apply for every part of my life. That could apply for losing weight. That could apply for saving money. That also applies for growing my business. When I personally know that I made commitments to 6, 10, 12 other people, and the next time we meet, I have to report on what I did. My personality is such that I'm going to be accountable. And even if I don't make the numbers, it forces me to sit down and say, here's what I thought, and here's what happened. And so it's a very, very good learning exercise. And so for me, I think the number one why, at least for me, is accountability, because it keeps me in that area where I'm just a little uncomfortable.
Well, the embarrassment factor is terrific. I mean,
and again, even if
you go to school and I don't have my homework.
Yeah, I can think of one group, and Dan, I know you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about when I say this, but I'm not going to say his name. But he would come to our groups and be like, "I suck. I didn't make my numbers. I didn't do this. I just suck at this. I suck at that." But the nice thing that he would do is he would say, "Now, this is why I did not make my number." And what he ultimately ended up doing was he turned a very, very unvaluable business into a $4 million asset when he got done. And he did it in a span of about 5 years. And so point being is that, the biggest why for me is the accountability piece. A group of people to hold me accountable to do what I said I'm going to do. And then the second part is that moment to reflect when I do hit my goals and when I don't hit my goals. Because when you're kind of just a entity into yourself, sometimes you don't do that kind of hard thinking. So that's why number one. Why number two, Dan mentioned this before, but it's all about getting ideas. Some of the greatest ideas I've implemented at Triangle, shocking as it sounds, actually didn't come from me.
Well, newsflash.
But it's true, right? When what you are looking for is, this is such a big challenge in peer groups. Everyone wants to be the smallest company in the peer group. Everyone wants to be. Now let's just do a little math here. If everyone wants to be the smallest company, will there ever be a group? I am in several groups, and in some groups I am the largest, and my role is to teach and to train and to help and to get ideas from companies. I mean, I always tell people all the time, one of my favorite phrases is nothing drives innovation like desperation. So I like smaller companies because they're scrappy.
Well, what's really funny is you're absolutely right. Everybody, well, I can get into your peer group, and
right.
will I be the smallest guy? And you may be, but I'm running a turf care peer group right now, and the smallest company in the group are a couple of young guys who understand marketing, social media, Hootsuite, all of this stuff, and these guys are just incredible. they've just started a couple of years ago. They're definitely the smallest. And you've got companies in that group who are doing $8-10 million who are just spellbound by their knowledge.
Mhm.
So it's not always like, who always, we sponsor the Associated Group, which is, I don't know if it's a peer group, but it's an industry group. And I'm always amazed by Bobby Jenkins, who's probably the largest guy in that group. And he sits at the table and the younger guys or the smaller guys are talking and he's taking notes. Now,
Mhm.
that is pretty cool. And so it's not always about being the smallest guy, because the biggest guy doesn't always have all the answers.
Right.
And if you take that to the nth level, look at like the Terminixes, the Orkins, the Renikills, and just their computer systems. For them to turn on a dime, they can't do it. Right. The bigger you get, it's harder to turn on a dime. And innovation comes from the smaller guy.
Mhm.
That's exactly what's really cool about these peer groups, especially being the small, company, and the small guys learn. But if you're a small guy, you've got to bring something to the group. You can't just take. You have to have something that everybody's interested in.
Well, as I've aged, there's something I've learned, and I'll pass it along.
By the way, you've aged very nicely, with your peppered.
For that compliment. I think it's a backhanded compliment, but I'll take anything I get.
Yes, you look like Johnny Neutron, but Jimmy Neutron or whatever his name is.
The thing I have learned really is I used to be impressed upon the size of a business. If someone was at 20 million, I'm like, oh my gosh, man, they're killing it. Someone's at 100 million, like, oh my gosh, man, they're doing so well. I have learned as I've aged, the numbers don't impress me. Momentum does. What I'm looking for is, what is this company doing? You could easily sit on a third generation guy who's sitting at 10 million. And, from an outward experience, outward appearance, you're like, well, if they're at 10 million, they obviously know what they're doing. Not necessarily.
Not necessarily at
all. Not
all.
necessarily. So one of the things I have learned is that pay less attention to revenue numbers and look more at momentum. Momentum to me is really, that's where the value's at. And so, when you think about, what kind of group do you want to be in? I personally like being in the middle of the pack. I like folks who are larger than me. I like folks who are smaller than me. That for me is kind of a sweet spot, because, if there's some folks in there bigger than you, I promise you, they have dealt with issues that you're going to be dealing with in the next 2 to 5 years. Whether or not they have the momentum, they have dealt with them. And likewise, if you've got someone smaller than you, they're probably going to be bringing a ton of innovation into your group. And so I just think that, this idea that I want to be the smallest guy in a group, or I want to be the smallest, person in the group, that's just not a good strategy. I like kind of middle of the pack. And then, the last why is that, there's an ability to help in very specific ways. And what I mean by that is that I have taken ideas that I've learned in peer groups and I have implemented them at Triangle, meaning that I went to one of my peer group companies, sat down with them, walked through how they did it, and then brought it back. Like, it was very, very specific, if that makes sense. It wasn't like, you go to a presentation and they're like, hey, you got to get in a mosquito. Oh, you need to add this, you need to do that. And you get this nice broad stroke. And then it's like, now go figure it out. No, I can go to a company and sit down, take notes, watch it happen, get on the phone with someone. I mean, so that's a very big why for me. I think it's really, really important. It's just building your network, understanding what's out there. So anything else to add to whys before we move on to Wednesday?
It's also you can get your, maybe you have a call room manager, and somebody else in the group has a call room manager, and you can get the two together and they can exchange notes and whatnot. And it's pretty cool. And the peer groups that I've been involved with, none of them compete in the same markets. So you can basically share anything and everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty important. But sometimes you get somebody who's real far south and somebody who's real far north, and running a business in the south is a lot different than big snowstorms and things like that. So you get an interesting perspective. But I like the fact that it's not just the owner sharing; it can be team members as well.
So let's talk about when it's a good idea to join a peer group. We've talked about the why, we've talked about kind of some guidelines. And I'm not telling you that this is the answer. This is Donnie's answer. Okay. For me, if you're working in your business, meaning that you're doing stops, you're in the office, you're doing whatever, that's when you probably need a mentor. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to need that individual attention, and you're not really, in my mind, going to be able to bring a ton to a peer group. So I don't know that it's the right time. When you're at a point that you're actually working on your business, that's when peer groups are helpful, meaning that you have time. I'm not saying that, actively.
No, you're right. When you're thinking strategy, that's a peer group.
Right.
When you're running stops, that's not a peer group.
That's right. So for me, the biggest delineator, when do I use a mentor? When do I go to a peer group? It really is when you have the ability to start working on your business. If you're so small, you're running stops, you're dealing with customers, meaning that, you're on the phones and you literally have no time at all to devote to strategic things, you really need to get with a mentor. That's going to be a better use of your time than going to a peer group where you've got folks talking about, managers, and it's just not your world. Once you kind of worked yourself into the office and you really are focused on strategy, now you can start bringing stuff to the group, and you can really benefit from it, because you could sit in a peer group meeting and someone start talking about this new marketing strategy. If you're out running stops and dealing with customers, it's like, well, that's a great strategy. Don't have time. It's just not going to be useful for you.
Our business is different. We can't do that. We're a much different business.
Yeah.
Right. I can't tell you how many times I do that.
Any other thoughts about when to go, Dan, before we move on to how?
No, I think that's a really, really good observation. And oh, by the way, if you're running stops and doing that, you have to go as quickly as possible to get to a point where you get yourself in the office and start working on your business and not in your business.
I will tell you just a quick story, because I don't like telling stories, but when I started Triangle, I had built some savings, and man, I ran to $1 million as fast as I could. Read that to me. My first 2 years, I blew through probably about 400 grand of my own savings that I had just to get the business to $1 million, so I could get my way, so I could get off.
I just remember when I tried to raise the accounting fees that you flipped out at me.
hey, and that hasn't changed today either, my friend.
That's right. You know why we're good? We're expensive because we're good. And by the way, if you don't think that about your service, then you got to rethink.
Oh yeah, so. For sure. So let's talk about how you do this, right? I mean, I think a lot of people probably have heard of peer groups. Hopefully, the value of doing it or the value of not doing it, depending on where you're at. Let's talk about how to do it. Well, number one rule I would say is going back to this whole principle I've talked about before, which is, I would be trying to surround myself with companies with momentum. I'm not telling you don't pay attention to revenue, but companies with momentum is really who you want to, that's who you want to pull around. Number two is talk to a connector. A connector would be someone like Dan, someone like myself. I'm not telling you that we're connected in the industry and Dan's a big rock star. Okay. I'm not. All right. But I'm just saying, but what I mean by a connector is that someone who knows a lot of folks in the industry, because oftentimes they can see things in you and they can see things in other companies that that might make a good dynamic. And then number three, in terms of how, is Dan mentioned this before, but you need to make sure, I would not be going to my state association and then grabbing everyone in my market and saying, hey, let's do a peer group, because it's just not going to work. Everyone may like the idea to begin with, but man, I'll tell you what, when it comes to marketing strategy, and I know this because, I did marketing, man, the knives come out and people just are not. You want a group where you're completely transparent and you're completely vulnerable, right? You're willing to share the bad, and you're willing to get into it. You're willing to deal in the truth, right? You're not holding anything back. You're not trying to hide anything. And so, the how for that is that I've seen peer groups started by a business owner where they kind of took it on themselves. I've seen peer groups started by Dan. I've seen peer groups started in other ways. But, the how is that number one is to start talking, start finding people who are doing it. Find someone who's in a peer group. Maybe there's room in there. If there's not, then, talk to a moderator or someone that, that are involved in peer groups. And so for me, those are kind of the three things to think about if this is something that you're interested in. Not a
I
whole
would
lot.
also add, so there are peer groups that are not industry specific. So there's more of the size of the business. So, Vistage or something like that, which is an outstanding organization. And
I
if you
agree
can
with
get
that.
yourself involved with that, that's terrific.
That's right.
We run industry specific peer groups, which I think are extremely interesting. And there are other folks who run them as well. But you got to think about, well, do I want an industry specific one or one that might be a bunch of folks who have other things in common, and both are terrific. So
I agree with that 100%. I mean, the good thing about going outside of the industry is that you're going to get a lot of business knowledge. The downside of going outside of the industry is that there are very real issues that a lot of folks may not understand. You start talking about route efficiency, you start talking about some product and the efficacy of that product and how people are leveraging that product. And, now you need to get into something as far as the industry. And so, okay, let's go to our final piece here, which is if you decide to do it. And I just brain dumped, some things that I think are important and some things that are to avoid. And Dan, feel free to add to these lists, but let's go through first of all, and some of these are kind of a repeat and some are not. But if you decide that, hey, I want to do peer groups, and this is, for me, I think this is going to be valuable for me. It's going to hold me accountable. It's going to help me get to the next level, whatever. Number one is that you got to find a group that has a really good moderator. I cannot emphasize this enough. I know this is going to shock everyone, but most business owners tend to be strong personalities. Not always, but they tend to be. So what that turns into is that you may have someone, much like myself, who likes to monologue, right? So you'll get into a peer group.
Demagogue.
Yeah. So you'll get into a group, and then all of a sudden, like this group turns into this, this platform, and one person's just kind of dominating the conversation, and it's their way of the highway. And I mean, it really just turns into this thing where you need a really good moderator that can work with the egos and that can keep the meeting going and that can keep people focused. And most folks, when you get them in a peer group, like they don't even realize it, but then when a good moderator can be like, hey, yeah, let's go ahead and move on. And most people are like, yeah, you know what, you're right. We need to move on, right? They don't get offended. And so I would just say that, it's really important that whatever peer group you get into, and this could be amongst even business owners, right, that are managing it themselves, you've got to have that good moderator. That's
one of the tools that we use when we're running the peer groups is a stopwatch. It's extremely important.
This is people off.
It just shut them down, because here, if you can't say it in this amount of time, then you can't say it at all.
Right.
So
yeah, that's exactly right. But it's true, man. The nice thing about a stopwatch is that it doesn't have feelings. So anyway,
right.
The second thing I will say, and I've mentioned this before, which is, try to look for a group where you're kind of in the middle of the pack. If you are a younger company, you can benefit from being the smallest one. And if you're a mature company, you know what? It's okay to give back to the industry. You know what I mean? And you can learn stuff from smaller companies. But, for me, again, I want to be somewhat in the middle of the pack. And so don't get hung up on revenue. Like I said, be interested in momentum. So that would be the thing number 2 to look for. If you're a part of a peer group, and you attend the first meeting and everyone's like, there's no energy. It's the same thing that they did before. And everyone's just kind of cruising along. Not your peer group. Just
right.
Not. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you what's interesting for me anyway, is like second generation, third generation. The older folks who are looking to retire and whatnot, and give it on to their kids or pass it on to their kids. This day and age, with technology and everything else, the kids are really smart and really bright, and it's really what needs to happen, or is happening, where here at WorkWave, is all the networking that goes on. And I love watching second generation, third generation kids just getting together. These are going to be future leaders, and that's what you want to do. You want to send leaders and future leaders to a
correct
group.
Yeah. I can't overemphasize the importance of a network. There's been multiple times that I've had an issue, picked up a phone, and literally within 30 seconds had another person on the other side on the phone helping me through it that's been there. So I think that's important. The third thing I would say to look for is diversity. And by the way, this is not some social outcry here. When I say diversity, I'm talking about diversity in services. I'm talking about diversity in location. I'm talking about diversity in business structure. It's just going to force you to think harder. If everyone is doing, like, we call it the Donnie program in one of our groups. If everyone does the Donnie program, you're not really learning a whole lot from that. And the reality of it is,
I'll second that.
yeah. But I mean, I don't want that, right? I don't want everyone who's thinking that, well, Donnie's got it all figured out, and let's all do Donnie's. That I would highly recommend that you don't do that, because the reality of it is that if you do that, there's not a whole lot you're going to take away from it, other than being in like an echo chamber, right? If you want to do that, then get on Facebook and talk about politics. But anyway.
Yes. So make sure that when you arrive that you're willing to give as well as take, right? And make sure, have a couple of tidbits that you think that, since the last meeting, we've done some pretty cool things, and here they are, right?
Right.
Usually what we do with our peer groups is there's a deck. We give you the deck template, and you fill out that template before you arrive. We used to have you submit all your financials, and all your routing, from the routing software, all the reports and whatnot. And some groups, we still do it, but we don't really review it. We just put it up there, and if you want to look at it, so you have questions. But really, the deck is a pretty cool way to do it, because it keeps you organized. You can go over, marketing, operations, finance, vehicle purchasing, and things like that. So,
and do you know who that deck's most valuable for, Dan?
Go ahead.
You, the business owner. I learned so much putting together data from my business, because it forces me to dig a lot deeper and to analyze a lot more when I know I have to present it, and I have to explain it, and I have to understand it. It's so easy to look at numbers and just take them at face value. When you are putting together a deck, it's like journaling. It just forces you to think a lot deeper. And so for me, I agree with you 100%. Let's move on before we close.
Well, let me just bring in one that you just made me think of. A lot of our peer group members are also our accounting clients, and that's when we get a lot of the phone calls. Hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? Mm-hmm. As if they don't look at their numbers normally, but because
it's impossible. They would,
group, they all of a sudden they call. What does this mean? How come we did this and that? And so from our perspective, you get more value out of PCO bookkeepers, I can tell you that, when you're putting your deck together. But when you were at Colmarch, it's probably the same, right?
100%. 100%.
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
All right, let's talk about pitfalls to avoid. And I've mentioned a lot of these, but and by the way, this is not the list. This is Donnie's list. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. There may be some things on here that you like. But I would say these are things that I try to avoid. Number one, it's all about priorities. I don't view peer groups as vacation clubs. I take vacations with my family, period, dot, right? If I can go somewhere and it's nice, great, but I'm there for a business purpose. So that's pitfall number one.
So are we talking St. Thomas or Tampa?
Well, here's the thing. I am okay with going to St. Thomas, but quick story. Yeah. I've been to Hawaii probably over 20 times. And let me tell you the funky thing about that. I have vacationed at Hawaii one time. And what I mean by that, when I flew in the military, Hawaii was a great place for a fuel stop. And so we would fly all day, and, late into the evening, we'd land, and we were on the ground about 17 hours. That's enough to get sleep, to get fueled up. And I saw a ton of Hawaii on the climb out. But, I was there for a job, right? I wasn't there to vacation. I went back to Hawaii with my family, like, man, this is pretty freaking great. Right. But my point is like, you need to kind of view, and again, this is Donnie's opinion. I think you need to view peer groups kind of in the same way. It's there to serve a business purpose. If you want a vacation club, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. I'm just telling you, this is Donnie's program. Okay. Second thing I would say is pitfall to avoid is leave your ego at your house. I have seen this happen in peer groups before, and it is detrimental to the group. And that is, someone puts out something and then they take offense when someone critiques it. You're signing up to have people look at your dirt and to critique your dirt. If you can't take that, or whatever reason, like you can't accept that, don't sign up for a peer group. It's not going to do you any good, right? You might need to go get some therapy. I don't know. Who knows, right? But but I'm just making the point that it's a pitfall, right? You have to be completely humble. And I'm not telling you that if someone says something and you're like, man, that person is so crazy, you smile and you say, thank you. That's great. You don't have to implement it.
You got to have thick skin, because people will beat you up, and
100%.
And that's just the nature of it. And it's you definitely have that thick skin. Let's leave it at that.
I was going to say, you just have to remember that in the end, everyone wants the same thing, which is we're all trying to get better. And getting better, it's not, I can't think of anything that I've achieved worthwhile sitting on the couch, right? It's you're going to have to look at the hard stuff. And so you just got to be, only thing I will just close this out by saying, make sure you keep your ego at your home and just be very humble. The third thing I would say to avoid is that everyone's perfect. Sometimes, Dave Ramsey has a quote that I love. And his quote says, when you're doing well, everyone thinks you better than you really are. And when you're doing bad, everyone thinks you're worse than you really are. And the point here being is that sometimes it's easy to go to these groups, or to go to like Pest World or even Workwave conference, and you see these folks and you think, man, they got it all figured out. And then you start digging and you're like, oh, no, they don't. And so just a pitfall to avoid is to assume, because you see a revenue number or someone says something that is smart, doesn't necessarily mean that they got it all figured out. So and that's just being wise, right? I'm not telling you, it's just, don't fall into that, because not everyone has all the answers. And what may work in Raleigh doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in California, or it's going to work somewhere else. And it's some sort of perfect strategy, right? It's just, so I think that's probably an easy way of saying, think for yourself. Okay. Okay. So I don't know what number this is, but taking and not giving, you show up to a peer group not prepared, you show up to a peer group not really giving, and you show up to a peer group not really contributing. That's what I call someone on the way out, meaning that I wouldn't stay in a peer group with you very long. So that's another pitfall. Make sure that you're contributing and that you're actively engaged in the discussion. Sometimes, when you're with a peer group, it's like a day and a half, 2-day meetings. That's a long time. It's a really long time. And it's very easy for you to kind of be dialed in on your company and no one else. It's kind of selfish. Don't do that. It's a pitfall to avoid. Next one is scheduling. If you're going to join a peer group, make sure you prioritize it and that you make your meetings, right? You don't do anyone any good by holding a seat and then not showing up, or showing up 50, 40, 30% of the time. And then the last pitfall I'll say is staying in too long. And what I mean by that is that if you're with a group and the momentum's gone and you're not getting anything out of it, be okay to end it. You're not married.
Bow out. Yep.
Yeah. It's nothing wrong with that at all, right? It's just like, hey, it's time for me I'm not getting out of this what I need in my business, and just be
and maybe it's time for another group. Maybe you went to another level, and maybe the group and the groups definitely have a life cycle, and you got to think about that as well. But one of the things that I see is a lot of friendships are made, over and above the peer group, which is
absolutely.
So,
I will tell you, some of the best friends I've made in the industry have been in my peer groups. I have some really good friends, and they'll be lifelong friends. Even after I'm done with the industry and they're done, we're still going to be buds, right? We're still going to reach out to each other. And so, Dan, anything to add there?
If anybody's interested in joining a peer group, here's a selfless plug. We are doing peer groups and expanding them, and maybe we could get Donnie to help facilitate them as well. But that's we've been doing it for quite a while, and if you're interested, why don't you email me, dan@pcobookkeepers.com. Happy to answer any questions, and if you think it's right for you, we definitely would we'd love to put you in a peer group, or if we get enough interest, maybe start another one. So
yeah. And I will, the thing I'll add to that is that, we obviously do this. It's not a self-promotion at all. You could easily do this on your own. You can do it with another,
Absolutely.
I'm just making the point. I mean, the whole point of this episode really is I wanted to do the episode because I think this is something that has been very valuable to me in growing my business and also growing my leadership, because I've had the benefit of being around some really sharp folks in peer groups, and I've learned a lot. And so I just want to share that with all of you. And so with that, just a reminder that all the resources and topics that we talked about today are available on the podcast website, pmpindustryinsider.com. Just take a look under show notes. And as always, we enjoy and appreciate any ratings and reviews. Just make sure that they're positive towards me and negative towards Dan. And with that,
exactly.
we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
Take care. See ya. Bye-bye.